Have they been in contact again at all?
No.
Do you know how to submit, like, my evaluation for the week? No?
No, but I'm sure it's somewhere in there.
Right, don't worry about it.
I haven't gotten any new information.
No, I'll double check this weekend, and I'll make sure everything's fine. I think next week's when it really starts. Right, I'll just walk you through it, and then you can just say yours.
All right, let's get started.
All right, hello again, Enrico.
Hello.
You all right?
Fantastic.
Great, I just got back from the zoo. I'm knackered. So these are my lesson plans for next week. Submitted on the Teach Now lesson plan format. We discussed that I was going to be doing the Aztecs and the Incas with the grade 7s next week, and this is the lesson plan based on that. So what I was hoping to be able to, well, first of all, some of the standards that will be addressed during the lesson, they'll be able to determine the central ideas and information of a primary and secondary source. So I'm going to be introducing them to primary and secondary sources, and also determine the meanings and words of phrases as they are used in the text. So there's going to be a few vocabulary words that they need to understand too, and I'm going to be introducing them to that. So the objectives of the lesson: identify and differentiate between primary and secondary sources, and then also get a general overview of the Incas.
Okay.
So the way I was hoping to do that is I was going to introduce the Incas to them through a PPT and give them some general bits of information. Last lesson they learned about Homo sapiens travelling through North Africa into South Africa 15,000 years ago, and I'm just going to basically say they coalesced into groups, and one of those very important groups were the Incas. Here are some differences between the Incas and yourself. Differences in clothing, differences in what they believed, religion. Here's some pictures of what their cities look like, things like that. Then I'm going to give them a little worksheet to work through, to get them thinking about some questions about the Incas and how they're different. Sure. So the first part should take 10 minutes. I reckon 10 minutes of introduction, and the second part 10 minutes of the worksheet. Then I'm going to do another 10 minutes of primary and secondary sources, and I'm going to introduce some primary and secondary sources that discuss the Incas, and then I'm going to have them categorise them into different boxes, and so that'll be 10 minutes of introduction to primary and secondary sources, 10 minutes finish primary and secondary sources. Guys, do me a favour, Stephanie, guys, can you be a little quiet up for a moment? Sorry, I know that's okay, but thank you. So for students with ADHD, such as Kaiwan or Stephen Gao, I'm going to let them draw an 8-box telling the story of the Incas, what they've learned. So they're going to draw about it and write a little bit about it. For students with English ELL, it's English language learners, ESL basically. They're going to work in groups with a Chinese teacher to see if they can identify facts, opinions, and reasoned judgment. So I've had to think about how to differentiate for different learners.
Sure. Okay.
Some of my formative assessments that I'll be doing, in other words, ways that they'll show me that they're learning, is they'll do a think, pair, share activity. So after I discuss the Incas, I'm going to give them some questions to talk about, and they're going to talk about with their partner first, in groups. And then they're going to share it with me. Also, when they've done their worksheets, I'm going to ask them to check each other's worksheets to see if they've got similar answers or if they've made any mistakes, and then they can share it with the class. So it's not so much teacher-centered, so that they are talking and discussing things with each other and hopefully learning from each other too. So that's that. And then, Ryan, which one going to so look, yeah, so here's the whole lesson here. On the second page. So the first thing I'll do is I'll walk in the classroom, make sure the classroom is in working order. Are the chairs all there? Are the desks all there? Is the TV working? Is the classroom tidy? Is it warm enough for the children? Yep. You know, all those things to make sure it's a comfortable learning environment. I'm hoping that I'm going to start putting rules and expectations up on the walls, nice and big, colourful, so that they know them, though they do already have them in their notebooks already. Then what I'll do is introduce the lesson title and date and ask the students to write in their notebooks, something I do every lesson, so they'll be used to doing that. And I'll make the students aware of the learning objectives for the day, something I haven't been doing, but I'll put that up on the blackboard.
Okay, that's always really good. I find it's very simple, it takes a little time, but it does help the students and yourself focus as well. Then you can come back to it at the very end if you leave them on the board, like did we do this, this, this.
How do you do your learning objectives?
Usually,
points?
not always, but yeah, just bullet points. And I usually only have 2 or 3. We only have 40 minutes, and the time can go pretty quickly. But I do write them on the board, like today we will learn.
Yeah.
And then I leave it there for the whole lesson. So at the end I come back, okay, which of these did we actually achieve?
Right, good. Right, I'll do the same. I'll do with bullet points, and then hopefully I'll do some formative assessment to make sure that we've done that. So I'll give a short history of the Incas formation and ask the students to take notes as they go along. Like I said, something we actually do during most lessons is I'll give generally a PPT with a few bullet points in and ask students to discuss it during class time and then copy notes into their notebooks.
Yep.
I'm getting bored of PPTs though, so to get it a bit more interesting next lesson, I'm going to do what's called a Prezi. It's a bit more interactive.
Yeah.
There, you seen them?
With them,
yeah. So I'm going to give that a shot. I'll give a short history of the Incas formation, ask students to take notes as they go along. Students will check their partner's notes, share any notes they've missed, and discuss with their partners some differences between themselves and the Incas. So even as they're learning, they're still working together in a group.
Right.
And then they'll share their answers with the class. They'll work in pairs to answer questions about the Incas on the worksheet. So that's what I put down there. So the students won't be working by themselves on that at all. They'll be working in pairs. What do you think the answer is to this one? Write it down. Yeah. With the introduction to primary and secondary sources, I'm not really sure. This is one of the things I would like some information from you from. How would you go about introducing the primary and secondary sources? You said.
Have they heard of the concepts at all? So this will be a fresh introduction.
Yes, well, I know they need a longer time than maybe 10 minutes.
I don't know, depending on the level of the class.
Yeah.
Something like that, I would usually start. This almost requires a separate class in itself.
Yeah.
But when I introduce it, I typically ask, how do we know about the past?
Right.
At that level of generality, what kind of things do we use to find out information
about
the past? And they'll give you a whole bunch of things. They'll typically start with the internet. And you just gotta kind of push them and guide that discussion, and then you get a whole bunch of different sources on the board, like books, artifacts, if they know that word, and all this stuff. And then you can start asking questions like I see you have here. One of the things you want to think about is which is more reliable, primary and secondary. Now they won't know what primary and secondary sources are yet, but if you can ask the questions in such a way that the primary sources on the board and the secondary sources get kind of divided. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
An artifact, they should be able to recognize that an artifact is a different kind of information from, say, a book or something on Baidu.
Right.
That's a bit vague and abstract, but I would actually take a lesson just for that, just to brainstorm about that and do some basic information.
They've got 2 lessons on the Incas this week, so what I'm hoping to do is touch on it this lesson, then touch on it next lesson this week too. I do some more work on it, so and a little bit more information on the Incas.
Another way you could do it, real quick, is if you could just display in your PPT an example of each before you even introduce what a primary, what a secondary source are.
Right.
They presumably haven't really had any information about the Incas before.
No, yeah.
Okay, so you give them like one image of an artifact, like an Inca artifact, whatever it could be. The Machu Picchu, the ruins of Machu Picchu. What can you tell about these people from this? What is this? And then if there's something written, I don't know, but maybe an example of a secondary source, but just to get them thinking about. How much information you can get from a particular kind of source, and how are these sources different. Then you can explain specifically, this one's a primary source, this one's a secondary source.
Okay. I like that. I think I'll give that a go, actually. Good. And then the students will work in groups to categorize examples of primary and secondary sources. So I need to see that they understand what a primary and a secondary source is.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, the easiest way to do that is to categorize it. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get like physical objects like that are primary sources, like a book, and say what's this, or like go place it in this category, or go place it in that category, or if I'm just going to get pictures of objects and ask them to move it around on their desk. That's a primary source. That's a secondary source. I'm not sure what would be the best way. Have you done anything that you like particularly in the past?
I'm lazy with objects and bringing objects to the classroom. I start with kind of a funny. I use myself or a student, typically a class clown type student, as an example. Like, say, if Mark writes a book about himself, is a primary source.
Right.
You know, if somebody 100 years from now writes a book about her, it's a secondary source.
Right. I see.
Yeah, and that's an easy way for them to digest the difference. But I do like you mentioned last time in our last conversation about getting them moving around. I do like that, and I think for this age group that's quite suitable. So if you could find a way to make that work at a basic level, that would be pretty good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give it a shot. Primary source is on one side of the wall, secondary source over there. Here's some examples. Where should it go? But I do like that one about. I'll steal that about if Mark writes a book, it's a primary. 100 years later, it's a secondary. Yeah, and that's it. And then for homework, I want them to start thinking about which one is more reliable and why they think that. I think this will work well for HA. That's honours class and advanced class, the best class, second best class. But I'm not so sure about R and ESL. So I'll have a think about how I can simplify that, probably that question, or I'll have them start thinking about something else, or just getting to grips with the vocabulary of primary and secondary sources, which I have that for.
Okay, great. Yeah,
it's just a camera, different types of primary and secondary sources on a word search. But that's it. Yeah.
Do you have your own answer in mind that you'd?
Which one's more reliable? I don't know.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
I don't.
It's not really a
tough question.
Right or wrong.
Right. Well, maybe I should hint at that a lot more. So
that's what when I use that example of writing a book by yourself, somebody else writing a book about you, I then lead that into explaining the concept of bias, and they both have drawbacks. Primary source is more obviously biased. If you write about yourself, of course you're going to make yourself look good, but if I'm writing a book about King Mark 100 years ago, I might hate you. So that'll color my how I portray you, and vice versa. I may think you're amazing, and I may be your best friend or something like that. But yeah, it's an important concept for them to start thinking about.
That's good. I think next lesson I'll probably focus more on bias and how things are biased, and I'll use their homework as an example to lead the lesson.
Yeah,
that's a good idea. So that's it. Yeah. Thanks for your opinions, and I think that's all she wrote this week. I don't know if there's anything more we need to discuss, but basically what's going to happen next week, I'm going to do the lesson, I'll film it, and we'll meet to discuss it and how it went, and we'll talk about next week, the week after's lesson plans, and we'll do that every week for 12 weeks. Which is why one of the things I wanted was probably a more solid time. I know you don't have many solid times. Wednesdays generally work for you, right?
Wednesdays and Thursday afternoons. Thursday afternoons are completely free.
Right, okay. Okay, we'll try and do that. That should be fine. All right, well, thanks, Enrico. All right.